subscribe.
Popcorn therapy. Holistic health and wellness through the lens of pop culture. Hi, and welcome back to Popcorn Therapy. I'm Julie Peters. I am a therapist and a writer and a tarot reader, and I've always really loved pop culture. I think we use movies and TV as therapy in a lot of ways, and sometimes movies and TV can give us things to talk about in terms of the sort of topics that come up in therapy a lot of the time. And today I want to talk about Soul, which is a kid's movie about death. And it touches on, obviously, death, which is a topic that comes up in therapy pretty often, and the meaning of life, what I'm supposed to be doing here, which is a question that comes up really commonly in tarot readings. Actually, I would say it's incredibly common for people to come in for a tarot reading and want to know, like, am I on the right path? Am I doing the right thing with my life? Should I change what I'm doing in my life? And Soul, the Pixar movie, does some really beautiful things illuminating those questions. So, in case you don't know it, Soul is a Disney-Pixar collaboration, and it is the first Pixar film to feature a Black lead. I'm not going to really super go into the racial aspects of this movie today. I think there are probably people who could speak to that much more effectively than I can, but I will say that the music in this movie is its own character. It's about a jazz musician whose name is Joe Gardner, and he is living this kind of mundane life where he's working as a music teacher, but he's always wanted to be a professional jazz musician, and it hasn't gone so well for him. He's offered a full-time teaching position, and he sort of has this ambivalence about it because that's not what he really wants to do. He wants to be a jazz musician. He gets a chance to play in Dorothea Williams' jazz quartet, which is like a dream come true for him. And he's so excited that he falls down a manhole and dies. This all happens within the first 10 minutes of the movie. And the rest of the movie is partially placed in the Great Before, which is this theoretical place where souls come to learn things before they incarnate on Earth. And Joe develops a relationship with 22, who that number represents, like, she was the 22nd soul. So she's a very, very, very old soul, voiced by Tina Fey. And she has not incarnated on Earth because she kind of doesn't buy, like, why would anyone want to go there? That seems like a bad place with lots of bad things. And so Joe works to convince her for different reasons why she should incarnate on Earth and have Earth experiences. Through various different plot devices, they end up accidentally on Earth. 22 is incarnating Joe's body. Joe ends up inside of a cat, and the two of them have adventures and learn about the meaning of life as they sort of jump back and forth in some ways between this theoretical great before, great beyond sort of realm and the realm of the real world, where Joe is trying to get back into his body, trying to come back to life so that he can play this show with Dorothy Williams. I have a 3-year-old, and this is the movie that we watch when I want to have a nap. So I put it on and he'll watch it, and I'll kind of snooze as he's watching it. So I've actually watched this movie with my eyes closed many times before. The music is so good, and it's so carefully and thoughtfully placed throughout the context of the movie. So it's not just that Joe's a jazz musician and he plays beautiful music. It's also that the music punctuates certain scenes and certain conversations. It illuminates New York in this really cool way. It's sort of like a musical landscape of New York. And it illuminates the Great Before as well, this sort of theoretical, not quite alive place. The music was done by, the ambient music for The Great Before was created by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross of Nine Inch Nails. And it's beautiful. It's very cool. And a lot of the jazz music was really informed by various people who consulted, including a cultural trust at Pixar, to try to represent the African American roots of jazz music in America and really present it in a way that's quite authentic. So, there are parts when Joe is playing piano, he's a pianist, and the music was carefully listened to and analyzed so that Joe would actually be pressing the correct piano key when that tone was sounded. So it's actually very authentic to the music there. John Batiste did a lot of the music. Herbie Hancock and Quincy Jones were consulted. They worked on the movie as well. There were a few other people that consulted to really make the landscape of the movie musically amazing. So, if you ever had the opportunity to lie down with a 3-year-old and let them watch the movie while you close your eyes and listen, it's actually a beautiful experience. So music is not my thing, and I'm not going to speak too much about the racial aspects of it. That's kind of all I want to say there. I actually want to talk more about the philosophy of the film and just the fact that this is a kids' movie about death. So I have friends with 3-year-olds. Not all of them are comfortable watching this movie. Some of the kids find it scary because, as I said, Joe dies in the first 10 minutes of the episode. And this is something that I've thought about before. Like, I know this topic is going to come up with my kid. How am I going to talk to him about what death is and what it means? We can't protect our children from meeting the experience of death. What I like to think of in my writing and in my therapy practice is the death light. This is actually a concept I got from Clarissa Pinkola Estes in her book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, on the wild woman archetype. And the death light is something that she talks about with the Baba Yaga, who's the Slavic witch in the woods character who hands an innocent young maiden this skull filled with light. And it sort of represents for Estes the death light, which comes into our lives from time to time, not according to our choice or our decisions. It just shows up. So, maybe we have an illness and we think about immortality, aging comes up. Someone in our life could die or could be close to death. I was around 11, I think, when my grandparents started dying. And in my case, 3 of my grandparents died within 18 months of each other. So there was a lot of death in my family when I was at that sort of tender puberty age. Now that I'm an adult and a parent, I know that when my parents die, that's going to be tough. It's harder, I think, than a lot of people talk about. And I'm aware of it now from this generational perspective where, when my child's grandparents die, I don't know how old he's going to be, but I don't get to decide, when he's developmentally ready for that to happen. Like, it's just going to happen. When it happens, I'm a bit of an older mom, so it might happen for him sooner than it might if I had children when I was younger. I don't know. Like, we, again, don't get to plan these things. But it is something that's going to come up. So I loved that I had an opportunity to show him a movie where someone dies, and a lot of the content of the movie is about death. And, I'm one of those parents, maybe as a counselor, that's quite ready to have these conversations and curious about having these conversations. I'm not so scared of them, I guess, because I've thought about them so deeply. I'm not so confident that I know how to use the right language for the age of my child, but I know that I'm willing to talk about these things with him. It's really important to me as a parent to come from a perspective of being able to just openly talk with my kid about whatever he wants to talk about. One of the things that I've learned in therapy, my own therapy and also being a therapist, is that many of us needed more guidance than we got. I think this is generational in a way as well. I think maybe we're in a generation where people are a bit more wanting to have information, wanting to share information, being more open about things that in previous generations there was more of a taboo about, don't talk about that, just don't bring that up, all those things. And one of the major pieces that I work on with my clients as a therapist is inner child stuff. I do a lot of trauma processing and trauma healing. And I often am looking at, when this feeling first came up, like how old is this feeling in your body? And we often discover young versions of ourselves that were going through whatever it is that they were going through. The many inner children that I have met, so many of them were going through a really difficult time. And as we kind of look back and process this memory, it's not so much that we wish that hard thing didn't happen. That might be a part of it. But it's that the thing that inner child would have needed at the time is someone who could have just calmly been present while the kid talked about it or was able to ask questions. A lot of what I've learned about attachment theory is that from a child's perspective, it's not about a parent having all the answers or knowing how to do it correctly. From a perspective of attachment theory, what a child needs is a parent who is present and cares. So that parent could make mistakes, they could say the wrong thing, they could show an emotion, right? But continuing to come back to that child with a steady, confident presence teaches the child's nervous system. This isn't a conscious thing, but it teaches the child that this person is safe, that you can talk about anything with this person. I plan on really leaning on this when my kid is a teen and having way more challenging things that might be even scarier for me to talk about with him. But I've learned from so many of these inner children that I've met that what they need from a parent or a loving adult is just being there, even if they don't have any idea what to do. I think a lot of us as parents get stuck because we feel like, I don't have experience in that. I don't know how to deal with that. That's not something I grew up with. That doesn't matter so much as you showing up to a child and saying, yeah, that sounds really scary. Tell me more about how you felt about that. And if they ask a question, just saying, I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe we can find out together, or here's what I do know about it, but I could be wrong. Those kinds of conversations are potentially really important for children, even and especially when things are stressful. And in the case that I'm talking about, where the death light shows up and maybe a grandparent dies or a friend dies or, a parent gets sick or something, and the child might need to talk about death and what it means. So coming back to Soul, Soul presents a very interesting philosophical perspective on death. So 22, again, is that young soul voiced by Tina Fey, who is having a hard time incarnating on Earth. She doesn't want to go there. And I think one of the things that is so fascinating in this movie is that it appears to be teaching about the meaning of life, the spark, the inspiration, the reason why one should want to live a life on Earth. 22 and the other new souls have an Earth pass, and it has little badges on it like a Girl Guide or something. The one that is never filled for 22 is the spark. It's the reason of living. And so Joe assumes this means what it has meant for him in his life, which is being a professional musician. That is his spark. That's his thing. That's the thing that he feels that he should be doing in his life. And again, many of us get this anxiety of, what should I be doing? What's my life's path? A lot of people really struggle with this issue in terms of work. I think that work is an issue that maybe never goes away. I think people are always trying to figure out, what should I be doing? What are my talents? How do I balance work and family, or work and pleasure, and all these things? How much money do I need to be happy? What do I trade off in order to be in the place where I'm meant to be? And that meant to be is a big source of anxiety. I think a lot of the time people worry that they're not where they're supposed to be, as if that is written for you, right? As if somebody decided before you came into your life what you were supposed to do. There's this cute moment when 22 and Joe are sort of exploring the great before, and they have this big area where you can go and look at all kinds of different things that Earth has to offer in order to try to figure out what your spark or your inspiration might be. There is painting, there's being a librarian, there's music for sure. And 22 says, I don't like music sounds. It just feels like a little too much, which is funny. And then there's a moment when they're in a bakery, I think it is, and Joe sort of realizes wait, you can't smell or taste. And she's like, no. And they pop a piece of pizza into their mouth, and then it pops out their butt on the other side. I think this is way funnier than my 3-year-old does. For some reason, he doesn't find this funny, but I think it's very funny that the full slice of pizza goes in the soul mouth and it pops out whole out of its butt. I don't know. Maybe that's just my childish humor, but I think it's pretty funny. But I think what's significant about this is that the one thing that's missing in the great before is having a body. It's being able to have the experience of taste, smell, and all of the other senses. And also, in my opinion, desire is a driving force in our lives. Desire is the driving force that brings us towards each other in a sexual attraction sort of way, but it also brings us towards our spark and our meaning. So much of the time, it's our desire that shows us, that quote unquote path that we should be on. Certainly for myself, I had to have strong enough desire to go and get a yoga teacher training, which my parents weren't so into. They didn't think it was the best idea for me, but my desire was strong enough that I knew that that's what I needed to do for myself at the time. Becoming a counselor, desire was a major aspect of that. That desire that pushes us through school in order to keep on going to learn the things that we need to know in order to go on the path that we're on. Desire can also take us to lots of other things that aren't about work and career. But I think that desire is something that's really bodily. It's felt very physically. So when 22 accidentally gets into Joe's body, they have a moment where he finds her some pizza, right? He's like, you're hungry, have a slice of pizza. It's New York, pizza's everywhere, just have one. And she, in Joe's body, takes a bite of this pizza, and it's like her mind explodes. It's like the best thing she's ever experienced is eating a piece of pizza. So Joe eventually gets his wish, and he gets back into his body, and he recovers from his fall, and he's not dead after all, and he gets to play that show with Dorothea Williams, and it's amazing. They're all in the zone. The audience is right there with you. I used to go see this improv jazz group called Calmunity in Montreal when I was in university there. I would go sometimes by myself on a Sunday night, and it was all improv, and there could be 10 musicians sometimes on stage. It was just whoever in the community was available. They would all get together and they would play, and they would just riff on like the mood of the room, I think. And again, this is something that was very bodily. At the time, I was studying poetry, and I was learning about cadence and how poetry, when read out loud, can be expressed through the breath and how that changes an experience in the body. So I was really interested in like how the written word could come together with a felt experience in the body. And, as things have evolved in my life, I became a yoga teacher and then a counselor, and I'm a somatic counselor. I'm very focused on what's happening in the body and in the breath, because I think that's where all of our emotions are held, actually, not in our heads. It's all in the body. Okay. Little secret they don't tell you. So in that experience that I would have with this group, I would be in there, and you could like feel the mood of the room, and you could feel it changing and moving with the music. And it was like the music was in relationship with the audience, was in relationship with the music, musicians in relationship with each other. It was incredible. And I feel like soul represents that moment really beautifully in the show that Joe is doing with Dorothy. It's gorgeous. Perfect. Everything he's ever wanted. Absolute dream come true. And then they're standing outside, and it's like, that was great. Everything was really beautiful. And Dorothea says, wow, you have a show like that once in a decade, or I forget exactly what she says, but once in a while you have a show like that. And he goes, well, what now? And she says, well, we do it again tomorrow night. And he has this sort of unspoken disappointment. You can see it on his face. He doesn't exactly name it, but you can see that he's feeling a little confused about why that didn't change his life, why he doesn't really feel that differently. He gets joy and he goes into the zone as a musician in lots of different contexts in his life, as a teacher or just when he's doing it himself, whatever it is. And maybe this didn't feel as different as he thought it would. And then he looks at these things that 22 had collected while she was in his body, and there's like a little seed, and there's half a lollipop that she had at the barbershop, and there's a pizza crust, and, a little ticket from watching a street musician that was incredible that she loved that kind of bowled her over. And he sort of has this moment of realizing like, maybe I got it wrong. And I forget this sort of the sequence of how this happens, but I think he goes back into the zone to find 22 and kind of tell her this, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happens. But there's a mentor, there's somebody in the great before who kind of explains to Joe, like, oh, you thought the meaning of life was having a spark? Like, no, that's not it. Or you thought the spark was, the path that you're supposed to be. He says something like that. This is not what you thought it was. And I appreciate that in the movie, they actually don't name it. They don't have anybody come out and explain to you, like, this is what the meaning of life is. So here's my interpretation. I'll tell you what I think. It's the body. It's what's felt in the body. It's the experiences that 22 got to have when she was inhabiting a body that she couldn't have in this theoretical before land where pizza would go in your mouth and out your butt and you wouldn't taste it. It's that momentary experience of being in the zone when you're playing music or like eating a great piece of pie or like having a cup of coffee in the morning, or like, when you're on a walk and there's like a cat that comes into your path and is like, pet my belly. maybe not the belly, but like you pet the cat and you're just like, this fur is so soft. It's so beautiful. One of the things that I teach often with my clients and in my courses when I'm teaching courses is a practice called moments of sweetness. And it's about taking the pressure off of needing to be happy in the sense of like, I need this big outcome to be happy. I need to, get married or get this promotion, or I need to, have a best-selling book or whatever it is in order to be happy. It's taking the pressure off of that and actually looking at what's already giving you pleasure in your life. What little routines have you already created that feel like pleasure to you? I remember this moment when I was going through a really hard breakup and I was really sad a lot of the time. And I went outside and it was sort of early fall and there had been a frost in the morning, but the sun was coming out, kind of warming things up a bit. I was out for a walk with my beloved dog, Finnegan, who has passed into the great beyond at this point. And there was a leaf there on the ground that had this beautiful pattern of frost on it. And I just stopped and like received the beauty. And it was really lovely to have this moment of beauty in the midst of going through this really intense grief process that I was going through. And so what I teach is to just practice that, to like stop when you notice that you're having a moment like that where you're feeling some satisfaction or some pleasure, or you're in that kind of like alpha brainwave state that they call the zone in the movie Soul. And you like take a breath and you really take that in, you really enjoy that moment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some spiritual perspectives here because I think this sort of plays into what I'm talking about. So one philosophy that I think is really interesting is that the reason we incarnate as human beings is because we want to experience life in a body and life as separate. So I've studied Tantra quite extensively, and one of the concepts that came up with one of my teachers while I was studying this was this idea that, you were one before you were born, and you're going to be one again after you die. And being one is this wonderful state of bliss, but you can't know it. Because as soon as you're aware of it, you're not one anymore. Like if you were really one, how would you know? Right? So one perspective is, a lot of creation stories from all over the world, like all different perspectives. They often say there was one and one was lonely, so one created two. That's the basic structure of a lot of creation myths from all over the world. And the concept is like, okay, you can have everything, you can be everything, but if you don't get to experience it as a separate being in relationship with someone else, you're just not having that experience. So one perspective on this is that we come and we're people so that we can be lonely, so that we can feel desire in our bodies to connect with another being, and then be in that complicated experience of connection that is sometimes blissful and sometimes so painful, because ultimately as separate beings in a body, we can never completely connect with another human being. The sexual experience for some of us is like a moment of that. It's like a little moment of connection, not all the time, right? But sometimes it can feel like that. But then we separate again, right? We come back into our separate selves and into our separate lives, and we have to renegotiate being separate people with each other. From a psychic perspective, which is like people who are psychic mediums and they, have maybe had near-death experiences, there's sort of people who feel that they have some intuitive connection to the other side. The lesson that usually comes through from that perspective is that we have many lives, we reincarnate many, many times, and we have a soul that is consistent. And that soul has some intentions. It has some things it wants to learn or things it wants us to do. And it chooses to incarnate, in certain areas of the world or with certain parents or whatever it is in order to learn certain things or, having a certain outcome. And from this perspective, I think this perspective is very interesting. I think it can also bring up a little bit of that anxiety of like, oh my gosh, what did my soul want me to do here? Like, am I getting it? And again, from this perspective, the reassurance is that when we die, we get a healing, we get a life review, there's no judgment. And if we didn't learn the thing we were supposed to learn, we just come back and try it again. There's like endless time, endless lives that you can do. There's no rush. You just you're just going to try it, and it's okay if you don't get it. And even still, I think there can be a little bit of anxiety with that. And I'm not sure how I feel about the whole idea of choosing a life. I think it's really hard to sort of square that with people who have really, really horrible lives, who are born into really difficult circumstances. Like, I think it's easy to say, we choose our incarnations from a place of privilege where, we're relatively safe and have access to, health resources and things like that. But if you're saying that about somebody who's born into poverty and violence, like, why would somebody choose that? I've heard some explanations around that say like, oh, well, we choose that because our soul wants to experience everything. I hear that and I'm like, I don't experience everything. No, thanks. I don't want to experience like torture, or I don't know. There's plenty of things I don't want to experience. I've also heard that, the soul forgets what it's like to be in a body. They forget the pain of what it's like to be in a human body. And so they have all kinds of ideas of what they want us to do. But then when we land in the human body, we're like, oh my gosh, this is so painful. Like, it's hard to go on. So anyway, all of that to say, I think that this movie brings up a really interesting concept around the relationship between the spirit and the body. And for me, from my perspective, from everything that I've researched, a lot of my own experience, the way that I work with my clients, the body is the place where spirituality exists. And the body can be a vessel for that spiritual experience. And the body is the place where that desire comes from that causes us to move forward. The body is maybe the meaning of life, just having a body, just experiencing a body. And it occurs to me that there's this irony of very spiritual people who live their lives as ascetics, and they meditate on the top of a mountain all day, and they live on a grain of rice or whatever it is. They abstain from a lot of pleasures in order to be close to God, or in order to like live that spiritual life, or in order to get into heaven, or whatever it is. And what an irony it would be if they showed up in heaven, or whatever that after place is, and they were like, you missed it. You missed the whole point. Like, you got to go back now because you missed it. You didn't have the pleasure. You didn't have the connection. You didn't have sexual experience. You didn't have, eat the pizza. Like, you got to go back and eat the pizza. That's what we're here to do. So, my question for you could be, what if the meaning of life was experiencing a body well, learning how to be in relationship with your body, learning how to learn from your body, learning your body's language, learning to give your body pleasure, genuine pleasure, not addictive numbing, but like real pleasure, like coming into the body. So if that was the meaning of life, what would you be doing differently? It's a question I'm sitting with. So again, I'm Julie. I am a therapist. If you want to do some somatic therapy with me, it's a little bit different from the talk therapy that you might know. With my weird background, I have some different ways that I like to approach therapy. You could go to my website, juliepeters.ca, and I do see people internationally online. You don't have to be local to me, though I am in Edmonton. If you want to come see me and you're in Edmonton too, come to the Wellness Clinic. That's where I work out of. You can also follow me on Instagram at Julie Peters Wellness and TikTok at Popcorn Therapy. And I'm looking forward to hearing all your thoughts and comments. If you watched this movie, if you liked it, what you think about those philosophical perspectives, I would love to know. Please be in touch, and I'll see you next time.
Soundstripe.